This technique will enable you to secure more potent votes, to have more backing when you as a conscious mind make a choice. Now, like all techniques, it's laced with belief and paradigms. So let's look at a couple of the paradigms that underlie this technique. The first paradigm can be looked at from two angles. One is fractal. So in the fractal or holographic paradigm, one finds essentially the same pattern at smaller and larger scales. So if you're looking at a fractal visual generator, you find yourself following very similar themes, but different variations as you keep zooming in an endless continuum of larger and smaller replicas of the pattern. Now, within this fractal paradigm, which can also be expressed as without, so within, as above, so below, we're talking about mirroring. That could be another paradigm. That the world we find ourselves in is a mirror for what's inside, that what's inside is a mirror for the world we find ourselves in. Now, why not focus on that? That what is inside is a direct mirror of the world. Well, because that places the emphasis of power. It's true, it's equally true, but it places the emphasis of agency, the emphasis of authorship on the world. If you are a mirror of the world, then all you have to do is get the world to change, and you, as a mirror of that world, will change with it. And similarly, if the world is a mirror of you, all one has to do is get oneself to change, and the whole world changes with you. Now, a lot of this is kind of laced into another paradigm, which is that there are no true observers in reality, only participants. And so how is it that changing ourself changes the entire world? Well, the self, what we call the self, the pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being that we say is I, the identity, this is a lens. We have reality looking back at itself. We have the self looking out and looking in. We have two branches of the tree, 6 feet apart, 10 feet apart, 50 feet apart, looking at one another. But they're from the same tree. Every single thing in the known universe finds its way back in the tree of space-time to, quote, the Big Bang. There is not a single part of who you are and your being that was not contained within that possibility field that is still expanding infinitely. And so there is nothing happening today that cannot be linked through both the tree of time and the tree of space back to that original moment. And so, on the one hand, when we change ourselves as part of that tree, the tree changes. On the other hand, the identity, the part that looks out and pretends to be separate from all that is, from the rest of the tree, and says, that has nothing to do with me, is viewed through the lens of the identity. The pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being. Now, when you look out through a different pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being, everything looks different. If you go out for a run, that's a pattern of doing. If you go out for a run and then you think about your life, you think differently. You see a different life than if you wake out of bed and say, I don't want to get out of bed, and look at your life. Now, is that life better or worse? Well, that's your value hierarchy. If you change your pattern of thinking and decide that this is now more valuable than that, then what was bad before becomes beneficial, because what was bad before challenged the old hierarchy of values, but benefits the new hierarchy of values. So when you change your pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being, the world is different because it looks, feels, and you engage with it differently. And there are no observers, only participants. You co-create the world with the world by your choices of identity. So the world is within, the world is without, the world is a mirror. That's one of the foundational paradigms for this technique. The second, and implied, is that all of the possibility and probability field of you is within, including all the inner ages. So if you think of rings of a tree, you've got age 1, age 2, age 3, age 4, age 5, age 6, etc., etc., etc. And if you cut a tree to the ground, you can count how old the tree is, because the old rings, the old pattern of growth, is still within the current pattern of growth. And it's providing structural support. And so the rings of the psyche, the various patterns of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being, leave a record within the body of the psyche, of the current identity. The current identity is flavored, influenced by, in many ways shaped by, unless we alter that, is shaped by those original patterns. So the 1-year-old inside still has a voice. The 5-year-old inside still has a voice. The 10-year-old has a voice. The 23-year-old has a voice. And those voices participate in the choices we make in the present moment. If at 6 years old you nearly drowned, number one. Number two, experienced trauma from that near drowning. Number three, were not effectively relieved of that trauma, did not experience competent traumatic recovery in a traumatically illiterate cult. Well, you then developed a coping strategy to deal with the trauma. Now, a very common coping strategy is, I don't want to think about it, I don't want to get near, I don't want to associate with water, and I dissociate from this moment in time. I disavow, I disown, I dissociate, I disembody my consciousness from what's going on in my body, and I partition that memory, that traumatic memory, away, and I never want to get near water, I don't want to learn to swim, I don't want to think about it, I don't want to talk about it. I've disowned. But from that point forward, if I get anywhere near water, my body starts ringing with the alert saying, get away, get away, get away from water. So you as a competent 40-year-old want to swim, you have a partner, you have a job, etc. All you need to do is learn to swim, and the water is not, it's not in tsunami terrain, it's in a lake, it's no problem, right? Rationally. But that 6-year-old in a traumatic state has a vote in the body and says no. No. And that vote is a loud vote ringing through time, ringing through the psyche. Protect life. Stay away from water. That's the coping strategy. That has an influence. And so the second paradigm is each of your past selves has a voice in the moment through you. That's a paradigm. Now, the next paradigm is that of politics. Now, we have a power structure in government in the United States where, you have a House of Representatives, and their job is to represent what? The people, the voices. And when decisions need to get made, you have also, this is where the fractal pattern ties in. So there's an inner politics and there's an outer politics. Now, when you make a decision as an individual, every part of you has a vote. When you make a decision as a country, every part of you has a vote. All the different coping strategies and agendas for navigating the reality have a vote. And so in a political bill, you have to get a majority vote. And if it's a violent political process, it's a vote of violence. You go to war, and if your people are all dead and the other people are 20 of them are still standing, then, quote, they won. In a political conflict, you also go to battle, but it's a battle for the hearts and minds of your inner constituents, your outer constituents. Now, the political paradigm is a very important one to understand that there are inner politics, that your psyche is as corrupt, as insane, as inefficient, as slow, as wasteful as anything you'll find in Washington. You have potential, massive amounts of potential that your 5-year-old does not want to go anywhere near, and so you haven't gone anywhere near that particular potential for 20, 30 years, etc. You've got parts of yourself that aren't talking to one another. Craziness over here, craziness over here. These two aren't talking to one another. The CIA is busy raising money to fund terrorists by selling crack cocaine in black neighborhoods in the 80s, etc., while the president is talking about the war on drugs, while the scientists are saying, why are we exactly lumping psychedelics in, et cetera, because, so the scientists aren't talking with the White House. And the White House isn't talking with the CIA. And you have what? Schizophrenia. You have self-sabotage. The people are funding this tremendous cost to the economy there's funding the CIA, then there's funding the war on drugs, then there's funding the prison system. So, for example, as the CIA raises black market capital by selling crack cocaine in black neighborhoods, in order to have undercover cash, in order to play political games they're not politically correct, because we're funding dictatorships, we're funding terrorism because they're dictators and terrorists that agree with us. And then on the other side, we're fueling millions of Americans going to jail, and then we're breaking up families. and we're ruining lives, to then take the people addicted to crack cocaine and punish them for being sold out by another branch of government. So you look at all of this and it looks absolutely, I mean, if you look at the data, if you read a book or two and look at the facts and read the redacted documents, it looks like it is insane. It is schizophrenic. It is inefficient. It is self-destructive. It is corrupt in every sense of the word. It is cruel and unnecessary suffering by any objective metric. And it's your government. It's our government. It is a mirror of what? Of our government. Because if you look at the shady deals between your 5-year-old and your 8-year-old and your 15-year-old, and how they undermine and actively work against your efforts to be responsible and get a job promotion or whatever it is that the 30 or 40-year-old is trying to look at. It is insane. It is cruel and unnecessary punishment. It is schizophrenic. It is secretive and underhanded. It is all of those things. Out there are going on in here. And there's no adult present. There's no competent, ethical adult present out there. There's no competent, ethical adult present in here. And so that paradigm leads to an awareness that to get something done in one's life, one has to pass a bill. One has to take a choice to vote, and one has to secure a majority of the votes. The 5-year-old may just want to suck lollipops. So if you don't give him a lollipop and your 8-year-old does, your 8-year-old says, "This you don't want any of this promotion crap. That's for grown-ups." It says, "Here, have a lollipop. We'll undermine it. If we do this, this, and this, then we don't have to get that promotion and take on more responsibility. Let's do this. Here, I'll give you." So you have a backhanded deal here. So it's part of the paradigm to understand what's going on in the politics out there, and to understand that in the fractal representation of things, you've got a political game on your hand. And as part of the political paradigm, it's important to understand that the majority is always wrong. What the majority of you wants to do in any situation is mediocre relative to what you could do. What a country's majority wants to vote for is always more inept than what a distinct, intelligent minority, meaning the parts of you that are smartest, wisest, kindest, etc., is a small part of you. You've got a lot of average and mediocrity in there. And then you've got some downright hostile, self-destructive, self-hating, addictive, determined to fail at all cost parts of you because that's what I know how to do. And so when you're doing politics of the inner self, to get a bill passed, you have to get the majority. It's not necessarily going to be a great bill. What you end up deciding after listening to all your friends, if you externalize the politics, what mom wants, what dad wants, if you externalize the politics and try and find a consensus for your life that most of the people in your life agree with, will be mediocre. If you copy the majority of your cult, it will be a mediocre life. That's the way it is. If you simply go along with the majority of what your cult indoctrinated ages want, it's very likely to be as mediocre as the watered down, corrupt bills that pass in Washington every single day. So those are the paradigms. Now, are these paradigms true or are they not? Well, that's for you to decide. If you look through the paradigm, you will see things that you do not see if you do not look through the paradigm. Just like this frame here. If you look through this frame, in this video, you see this. All you have to do is click over here, and there's all these other views and paradigms. It's up to you to choose to invest time and attention looking through this frame or another frame. So how do you make that decision? And who makes those decisions? Is it your 5-year-old? Is it your dopamine addict? Who makes the decisions? Who gets the majority vote? Well, that's your life. And so whether you look through a paradigm or not, an intelligent response to that question is, can I go somewhere valuable through this frame that I could not go through, that I could not obtain or arrive at? Can I go somewhere that I couldn't get to, that I value through another paradigm, through another set of truths? And that's ultimately your decision. It's your response to your ability to respond, to vote this way or that way. Now, what's the technique then of making better choices? So we're talking about better inner governance, better inner democracy, because you can respond to this somewhat horrific situation where the majority is always wrong. The majority is always, in many ways, mediocre in the way it averages out. You get a mediocre kind of goo of a dish in most cases when you weigh out all the different factions for all the different reasons and vote on something and compromise this, and you barely get it passed with 55% or 61% or whatever it is of the vote, depending on what that arena is. So that you head this way, often with a lot of kicking and screaming, and I'm going to undermine that bill. It's like, I never wanted to get up that early. You're making me do that to take this job. You've strong-armed me. I hate this job, and I'm going to entice you with drinking. I'm going to do something to get you fired so that I can sleep until 10 a.m. You didn't consult me before doing this and this and this, so I'm going to get you, right? So this is what happens when you strong-arm a bill. You have resentment, and this is also the righteousness of the inner divide, right? Because you have the superior one saying, "You stupid child, you don't understand," the abusive parent, and then you have the child saying, "You don't understand how miserable this is," and and you have chaos, you have anarchy. So how do you move from the default status quo to something more elegant, more beautiful? Well, it begins by utilizing the technology of the inner ages to understand who it is that has your best interest at heart, who actually believes that it is possible for you to create what you desire, what you long for, who believes that it is possible, who is willing to work their ass off if necessary to get it done, to make that dream a reality? Who's willing to throw everything into that goal, to that dream? Well, it's probably not going to be a traumatized 5-year-old. It could be an idealistic adolescence before they were hammered down by a critical parent. Who's the smartest one inside of you? That actually, if you follow their voice, drowned in the cacophony of mediocrity, fear, and pain of all the other voices, if you follow their voice, you end up transcending the mediocrity of your own psyche, transcending the mediocrity of your internalized cult. How do you get there? Well, you learn which parts of you are good at what. This part of me is a good contract writer. This part of me is good at playing devil's advocate and finding out what's wrong. This part of me is good at not going into the despair. This part of me is good at despair. The part A tells me this, and this could all go wrong. And then part Y says it's hopeless, let's give up, let's have complete despair. But part M on that continuum says, thank you for pointing out where it could go wrong. Let's learn from that, make adjustments, and then find the way towards where it could go right. Let's do that. Okay, and if you listen to that voice, you take constructive steps that increase the probability. Now, probability is an incredibly important principle, as another aside, but just to touch on it briefly. Because if you're trying to roll a dice and get a 1, you've got a 1 in 6 chance of getting a 1 if you have 1 dice. And this is where the power of probability comes in. What if you had 2 dice and all you have to have is have 1 of them land on a 1? What if you have 3 dice? What if you have 3 billion dice in a giant bucket and you tip it all out and then you start looking? Are you a 1? Are you a 1? Are you a 1? Now, in statistical odds, if you have more than 6 dice, you're pretty likely to have a 1. If you have 12 dice, if you have 20 dice, you're almost certain to get one of them be a 1. If you have 100 dice, and you just need to get one of them to land on a 1, you can do the 1 throw. Or, if you throw a dice, 1 dice, 100 times, you're almost certainly going to get a 1. Probability fields are powerful. If you understand the field that you're in, and then understand how to change the variable to change your probability field, well, would you rather throw 100 dice with the goal of having one of them land on a 1, or would you rather throw 1 dice? At 100 dice, you've got thousands of % in your favor. An investor would take that bet in a heartbeat. If you could go to Vegas and roll the dice with a 10,000% chance of winning in your favor and a 1% or 1/10,000th of winning for the house, everyone would go to Vegas and gamble because the odds are in your favor. And so, that's a good, when you follow one part of yourself, it changes the odds. Because every time you listen to this part of you, you get into a fight. And every time you listen to this part, your life gets a little bit better. So you propose a question to the inner psyche. Should we do this or should we do this? All the voices have an opinion, or some of them don't. Some of them say, you don't want to hear my opinion. Yes, I do. No, you don't. They're their opinion is don't ever share an opinion, because when you do, you get humiliated and da-da-da-da-da, and so I'm never going to share my opinion. Well, what if that's the voice that is more intelligent than most of the other voices, and that's precisely why the critical parent shut it up? Because critical parents are usually shame-based. So what is it that the voice is revealing that is activating the shame of the critical and incompetent parent? Probably a bit of truth. So in other words, if your most potent truth will not speak because it has internalized the fear given to it at a state when it was young and there were giants threatening it psychologically, financially, physically. Don't talk back to your parents. Well, that voice went quiet and said, the best thing I can do for the psyche is not to tell the truth that I know. Why? Because if my body is dead and traumatized, because every time I tell the truth in an incompetent situation, the incompetence that is revealed by that truth reflects poorly on what? The cult, the power structure, the family system. If every time I tell the truth, I'm traumatized, maybe truth is not as valuable at this stage of my development as having a healthy body that isn't traumatized, so I'm not going to speak. So then, who does pipe up? The pleaser, the enabler, who tells lies that do the opposite of the truth, that create comfort, that calm the abuser down, that calm the incompetent parent down, to a level where they don't feel as guilty, they don't feel as threatened, they don't feel as embarrassed. And so they're, nicer to the body at that period of time. And so the pleaser, the enabler, comes in and says complete and utter nonsense that calms the abuse down. But if you ask for an opinion on a bill, you're no longer a 5-year-old needing to avoid being hit by a giant. If you calm that fear down, if you ask what should I do here? And the part of you pipes up with a lie that makes mom or dad or this teacher or that teacher happy, or makes the bully happy, or makes your older brother happy. But it's a lie. It always was a lie. It just at one point was a lie that stopped you being hit or humiliated or hated or feared. Now it's just a lie that sends you off in the wrong direction. So how do you discover in a cult that is enamored with the idea of shutting things down, in a shame-based cult that doesn't want to hear, that doesn't want to see all manner of voices, that doesn't want to honor the diversity, even of our races, even of our different religions and nationalities, let alone our own inner diversity, the dissenting voices, the minorities within us, that never liked that idea from the beginning, and that were right. So it's very important to understand that the majority is always wrong, which means if you want to have an optimum life, you're going to have to listen to some particular voices within, some particular identities, patterns of thinking and feeling, etc., some particular ages that actually know what they're doing. So how do you find out which those are so that you know what you believe is what in the interest of the country, is in the interest of your life? Which is the right direction? Because it's your job as a conscious mind, as the governor, as the president of this life, of this body, it's your job to know who is trying to fuck you up, inside and out, and who is guiding you in the right direction. But that's not enough, you see? This is the paradox between the law of mass and the law of intelligence. The law of intelligence is scientific. Minimum effort for maximum benefit. Conservation of energy for maximum value. Efficiency of transforming a unit of time, money, or natural resources into sustainable human well-being. That's the law of intelligence. An intelligent person, when you show them a way to build a house that costs half the amount of money and produces twice the value, an intelligent person is delighted. Now, the law of mass is the norm, the status quo, the average. That's a different law. It's not the law of intelligence. The majority is always wrong. Now, it's important to understand what that means, because in another way of saying it, the majority is always late. So someone invents the cell phone. The majority says, who's going to carry around that brick? It's a useless technology. $1 a minute, bricks, these huge hunks, arrogant people, ruining restaurant experiences with their bricks. Unimportant, useless technology, says the majority. In what? The 80s, the 90s, right? But now, the majority is wrong again, but for a different reason. Now the majority is busily texting away and doing this and that, when a small minority is turning off their phones. Because the majority was wrong that cell phones were useless, and now the majority is wrong in saying that creating massive degrees of dopamine addiction to frenetically hunt trivia is a constructive use of the cult's time. I mean, if you think about it, if you were having a race and you had two cults, 1,000 people in this cult and 1,000 people in this cult, and one cult focused on building their soil for, sustainable agriculture, focused on becoming self-sustaining in electricity, focused on developing artistic skills, communication skills, relationship skills, cooking skills, dancing skills, healing skills, conflict resolution skills, and spent 10 hours a day as a cult doing that. And the other cult focused on making as much money as possible, and when that was a hollow and empty existence, flooding their body with dopamine by learning trivia and staring in front and stressing out in front of a screen for 5 hours a day, 50% of the time. Whose cult is going to be more intelligent in 10 years, in 20 years, in 100 years, following those protocols? So the majority is wrong again. The majority is late. Now, the majority will figure this out by the time that something else it's wrong about something else. So in the bell curve of innovation, the tiny majority that gets things right is the first to adopt something, invent and adopt something. Then everyone says it's a terrible idea. But smart people say, I'm going to do that too. That's a good idea. And it catches on. It grows and grows and grows, and then everyone says, fine, I'll do it. But in the 20 to 50 years it takes to adopt an intelligent technology in our cult, it, meanwhile, has developed in a small group of people a new technology, a new way of doing things that's more intelligent than that way. So by the time the majority has adopted the new technology, a small minority has developed an even newer, a superior technology that the majority is not interested in, that thinks is a terrible idea, etc. And this just goes on endlessly. This is called evolution. But what it means is that the majority is always 20 to 50 years behind, often by a factor of 10. It's easy to take any part of the institutionalized cult and make it 10 times more intelligent. In other words, to generate 10 times more value than it is, than the status quo, than what's being done. It's easy to make an institutionalized norm 10 times more intelligent to create 10 times more value. It's just the norm, the average, the status quo is not interested in that. Because what? It challenges the status quo. It rocks the boat. And so you have the challenge of, and you can tell the speed of evolution in a cult by how hospitable the cult is to its distinct minorities, to its low-rank minorities. If all you have to do is be different and non-threatening to the majority in order to be made a slave, attacked, humiliated, segregated, blockaded, and paid less money, etc. If you are treated poorly simply for being different, you're in a fear-based cult. You're in a cult of domination. And it's a slow cult. You'll evolve because a few of those minorities will actually introduce new technology that benefits the cult and which they accept. But not at the rate of a cult that celebrates its minorities and diversity, that creates a hospitable garden for all the many ways of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being to be evaluated and to grow. That is a tremendously valuable cult. So how do you work within this framework to get the votes you need in you to pass an excellent bill, to create constructive, meaningful change? How do you get those votes in you? And that's where the value of these paradigms of looking out. So you look out in Washington and you see how are these bills being watered down? Well, one of the reasons is that special interest agendas are lobbying out of fear and out of greed, out of fear and out of greed. The special interests are lobbying that diverge from what the majority of an informed people would actually vote for. So you have to get to know your fear and your greed so that you don't take the bait. Your fear says do this and your fear will go down. You can avoid your fear. And you take the bill. Okay, I won't think, I won't feel, I won't look at this possibility. I'll just continue doing this thing that I know is destructive because I took the bribe of my greed, of my fear. So what's next? Well, you want to hear from the different parts of you why they like it or don't like it. Now, this involves the technology of time travel, for one, because if your 5-year-old does not like this bill because, what, it's getting up at 8 a.m., 6 a.m., 5 a.m., whatever it is, and they just don't want to do that. There's nothing wrong with a 5-year-old not wanting to do that. But how are you going to get the vote of the vitality of that 5-year-old who has enthusiasm? How are you going to get their vote to do something you really want to do? Well, you may have to give them an alternate reality to generate a psychological space of making things more interesting in the 5-year-old's life. You go back there, you meditate, you give the 5-year-old, you certainly don't put the 5-year-old to work. You go back there and you give the 5-year-old play. You get up whenever you want to, you do this, that, and the other, etc. You have that arena. Number 2, your 5-year-old does share your body. Number 2, so if your 5-year-old really doesn't want to do this and that and the other, you can also look and try and structure a better bill, a better life, where you say, I'll keep that in mind. So you want to get up at 10 a.m., okay, all right. Is there any harm in that? Are you planning on pissing away most of my life, like we're going to go to bed at 6 p.m. and get up at 10 a.m., and sleep, 14 hours or whatever? What's, no, I want to do this and I want to do this. And you say, okay, well, keep that in mind. If we could pass this bill and you could get up at 10 a.m. and then do this and then do this, would you be interested in this? Yes, I'll sign off on the bill. And so you gather the data. When you do politicking, it's not easy going around and figuring out what everyone wants to hear. And there's a tremendous amount of lying that goes on because many politicians do not have the skill, the time, the patience. And many of the citizens, the cult members, are not informed enough to even understand what they want. They want a cash handout, but they don't understand inflation. Do you understand that if I just print money because you want a cash handout, and if I give a cash handout to you, unless we're going to break the law, then I have to give cash handouts to you and you and you. Do you understand how that weakens inflation? Do you understand how the Chinese buying U.S. bonds are part of why you have this free stuff as it is? And do you understand they're not going to want to keep buying bonds if we're diluting the value of the currency in which they're investing? You understand that? I don't want to understand that. Just give me the money, right? So when you're dealing with children, how do you navigate that? When you're dealing with uneducated citizenry, when you're dealing with 5-year-olds, how do you deal with that? Well, you have to earn trust by being trustworthy, by empathizing, by listening, by understanding, and by developing a track record of making things better. If every time something goes wrong, you blame your 5-year-old, if every time you didn't know something, you say, to your 10-year-old, you're so dumb. Why didn't you figure that out? Rather than being a competent parent and saying it's my job. I listened to a 10-year-old. I left this in a 10-year-old who I didn't train, just like your parents did. You see, all these fractal patterns go generation to generation within a cult. And so you're starting with very poor code. You're starting with norms, with averages that are crude and mediocre. Now, they're the best your cult has developed to date. And the fact that your cult is in existence when 95% of all cults are extinct means your cult is doing something right, but it's doing a lot wrong. Every cult is. But it's the best that your parents and the parents before them and all the relatives and all that, this is the best they could do. Now, you've been given that code in one lifetime, one span to figure out how to make that code better or live a mediocre life. You can live a mediocre life as a billionaire. not knowing the meaning of things, just missing the whole point. You can live a mediocre life in poverty. You can live a mediocre life in ignorance. You can live a mediocre life in constant fear. You can live a mediocre life as a white person, as a black person, as a woman, as a man. There's countless ways to live a mediocre life. But how do you navigate that code and look at how and why it was written this way and how that kind of works and write a different code? And then how do you secure the vote to be more intelligent and happier, but less normal? You see, there's some part of you that just wants to be normal. I don't care what it is. I don't want to stand out. I want to be normal. So how much of you values normalcy over happiness and why? Now, if you value normalcy more than you value happiness, if you value normalcy more than you value competence, if you value normalcy more than you value excellence and your goals, if a majority of you thinks that's the way to go, you are destined for mediocrity. Because every time you have the choice, I could stop watching TV and study my goal and do this. I could go out and meditate at midnight when this and this, but that's not normal. I could do this, but that's not normal. I could adjust, I could develop lucid dreaming. That's not normal. I could do all these things. They're just not normal. And so my biggest vote being for the norm, I will default to the norm. And even if my biggest vote is just to be lazy, the laziest thing you can possibly do, however self-destructively, is simply copy exactly what everyone else is doing. Because it doesn't take any work. If other people say yes, you raise your hand too. If they don't, you figure they know what they're doing and you don't raise your hand. It's so easy. You don't have to think, you don't have to feel, you don't have to iterate, you don't have to be responsible. And if anyone says, why did you raise your hand? They can say, well, everyone else did. Go talk to them. You can't get me. I was there with the majority. I just did what the majority. I followed orders. The other guards were burning the Jews in the gas chambers. And, I didn't want my relatives to give me a hard time, causing trouble in the family by questioning the sanity of the great leader, right? So, they told me how many pellets to put in, they pressed the button here. I wanted my ration, I wanted my pension. I did what I was told. Now, if doing what you're told creates the probability field where 20% of the people around you doing what they're told are depressed, where more people commit suicide in the United States than die in car accidents, then you're responsible. You're able to respond. You have a free body to do what you're participating in those statistical outcomes by conforming to the norm. But it's so uncomfortable. I don't want them to die. I don't want child abuse to keep happening. I just don't want to stick out. That's my highest deity. Not sticking out is my highest deity. I pray every day, please don't make me stick out. I want to avoid humiliation at all costs. Please, please. Oh, my goodness. I didn't stick out. I didn't do anything extraordinary. I didn't contribute to evolution in any way. I haven't reached my potential, but I didn't stick out because my goal, my deity, my God, I bowed down, please don't make me stick out. So there is the outcome. That's the response that I am able to make, and that's the response that I did. I am able to respond. I am response-able. It's power. You have the power. The people have the power in a democracy. You have the power. Now, how do you negotiate and get the deal? You first have to understand who's in there and why. You have to understand why they are the way they is. I mean, sulking didn't just emerge as a default mechanism for a 7-year-old. It came out of a process. It was a mirror of what worked. The 7-year-old said, I really want to do this. The parent said, shut up, I didn't ask you. The child said, but I want to do this. And the parent said, gave him a slap, and the kid ran off and did it. And then the parent humiliated and dragged the kid back, and don't you ever do this again, and if you want to be a part of this family, blah, 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 blah. And so the child said, I can't run, I can't speak, I can't do, this is a miserable life, I am going to sulk. I'm going to cry, but then I'm going to be slapped for crying. Okay, I'm going to sulk. And after 20 hours of sulking, the parents said, come on, stop sulking. And was nice to them because they sulked. For the first time, the hitting, slapping, ignoring, shouting, blah, blah, blah. Now they're nice to them because the kid's sulking. It's not enough. No, I'm not interested. No. The parents said, please, what if I got you a lollipop? No. 2 lollipops. No. 3 lollipops and a teddy bear, plus you can sit on my lap and sit in the front seat on the way to work. Okay, now we're talking, says the 5-year-old, says the 8-year-old. Thank goodness I found some currency. Some currency in this cult. Sulking. Okay, great. We're not getting what we want. 5-year-old pipes up, sulk. Sulk. You're not getting what you want, sulk. And you don't want to sulk. You realize that's not going to work in the boardroom. But the 5-year-old has every reason to vote for that. Let's sulk. I'm not doing that. And so you have to understand. You have to be able to go to that 5-year-old and say, I get it. All your votes are for sulking. All my votes are for creating a spreadsheet that shows why I'm the best person to do this job, which shows this is the best decision. I'm for data generation. You're for sulking. I get it. Good plan when you're 5. But how about this? Let me show you a new way of being. Let me show you how I'll be your parent now. So when you want to play, I'll go send you in imagination in psychic territory. A beautiful place for you. You can have this, and you can have this, and you can have this, and you can have this. How about it? And you don't need to sulk, and you'd miss out on all that stuff if you were sulking. And then I'm going to create the spreadsheet. You're 5 years old. You don't have to do that. And what about you, 6 years old? Well, I take revenge. I've learned it's hopeless. Nobody's listening to me sulking. I'm too old for that. Now I'm being humiliated for sulking. So I take revenge. When they're not looking, the sofa, I took the kitchen knife, I ripped it all up and pretend nothing was happening. That's how I get back, because it's unfair. It's unfair that they behave like this. The cowards, liars. Mom and Dad said this was, but instead they did the exact opposite, and they hit me. They hit me for telling them their own hypocrisy, the cruel bastards. See, I showed them. Now I'm not gonna admit it, but get them. That's the 8-year-old, 10-year-old. So you learn and you say, yeah, they were hypocrites. That was completely understandable. So we're going to create you another psychic space, right? Where you point out the unfairness of Aunt Josephine, the complete crap, the sexual molestation of Uncle Henry and this and that, and people, 1, listen to you, and 2, there's a response, and 3, the world changes. There's an apology, or we get you some better parents and uncles and stuff. Here, have them. And anytime you want something intelligent, you want to point out what my bullshit is, tell me. Tell me where my bullshit is. And okay, I get it. I apologize for that. You're right. So the 10-year-old feels important, right? And wants to participate now and has an engaged role. Anyone who's a competent parent who knows how to bring an adult into the world can bring an adult into the world, and vice versa. Anyone who can self-parent can be a competent parent. Because if you're just going to copy the status quo BS of, your parents and grandparents and use the same bullying tactics to get your way, you will undermine your family system, because you will raise covert hostility. You will raise sulking. You will raise manipulation, because that's what incompetent parenting gives rise to. And so you're not then going to be able to pass family bills either. You're going to bring this up and, no, that's a dumb idea, says your daughter, and I hate that, and you're going to share your feelings. Nobody's going to be interested. Why? Because you don't have the competency to hold space for all those things inside and out. So you gain authority. You gain authority by gaining trustworthiness. So first, you develop competency in loving as an adult. Second, you develop an awareness of each of the ages and what they need, each of the parts of you. My adventure part needs this. My creative part needs this. I develop competency by building these different areas, and then I demonstrate that competency by making things better. You can look at it as religions. One of the main strategies of religions is to take the people in the cult that are being tyrannized in some way, neglected, starving, raped on the streets, whatever, and they give them food. Whether it's Islam or whether it's the Christian missionaries or fundamentalists, whatever, they go into some place where people are miserable, and they give them food. They give them survival and security of survival. And they give them a sense of belonging to what? Their cult, their religion. And then they say, we'll do this and this for you if you'll do this and this for us. And that's how they develop loyalty. Now, at the same time, you have to read our bizarre text and do things the way things and say God is this word and not this word and all of this stuff. But that's how you build trustworthiness, by meeting the needs, by meeting the preferences of the inner ages, of the archetypal domains of the self. So my adventurer wants this, my security wants this, my streetwise part wants this, my my lust wants this, my pleasure wants this, my fear wants this. These are all the different parts of me, and this is what they want. And you have to show, to gain authority within your children, within your classroom, within yourself, you have to show that following your plan results in good things happening most of the time. You have to acknowledge when bad things happen. Like, yeah, I messed up here and I'm sorry, to yourself. The parts of you that went along with your plan, that you hadn't thought out well enough or that didn't work out. And you say, thank you for supporting me. I didn't do a very good job. I'm going to learn from this. I'm going to do a better job next time. Next time, I'm going to do a better job dealing with this. Can I please have your support one more time? I apologize, and what can I do for you? to make it up, etc. And we're going to keep going on this journey together. Now, when a political party says something like this, you've got that type of dynamic. When a political party says, just lies to you and then goes on, eventually you get tired of it. I mean, you said you would do this, you didn't do this, you didn't apologize. I'm not voting for you anymore. And so this is where political power weakens. And that's often why it sways. We have a tremendous amount of political incompetence in the cult. So you should expect a tremendous amount of political incompetence as you learn to be a good politician with yourself.